Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Trent. I am the program manager here at NASEO. Pleasure to welcome you all to a Pipeline 101 webinar in collaboration with our friends in the National Propane Gas Association, or NPGA, as well as Colonial Pipeline, both affiliate members of NASEO. So excited to have them on to provide some industry and pipeline ownership perspective. I can't understate the criticality of pipelines enough. Nearly 2/3 of all energy consumed in the United States is transported through a pipeline. So it's important to have these partners on the line, and happy to have them here, especially as it relates to energy security. So today we'll be learning more about propane gas and refined petroleum products industry and how they utilize this extensive pipeline network to meet their customers' needs. Before I introduce our speakers, I do want to run through a couple housekeeping items. As you can see, this is a Zoom webinar, so folks are automatically muted. Feel free to use the chat or the Q&A box to input some questions or other comments as folks go through their remarks. We'll be holding Q&A towards the end. We'll have about 15 minutes, so would encourage you to jot down your questions then. Beyond that, this webinar is being recorded, so we will share that with folks. For any reason, if you have any technical problems, my colleague Jasmine is on the line. Feel free to email her or send her a personal chat. She just put her email in the chat. So any issues, contact her. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. With us, Jake Peterson, Director of State Affairs with the National Propane Gas Association. As I mentioned, Jake will be providing that propane gas industry perspective. Following Jake, we'll have folks from Colonial Pipeline. You'll see Chip Little, Manager of Government Affairs, on the line. Many of you folks, I think, are familiar, especially in the Southeast, with Chip, a longstanding partnership with NASEO, as well as he brought some other colleagues, Aaron Smith, Senior Business Development Manager, and Neil Johnson, Business Development Manager. And they'll be providing that pipeline ownership perspective. So look forward to those comments. I won't ramble on too much longer. I want to hear from you all. So Jake, I'll pass it over to you to get us started.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah, and to NASEO for the opportunity to speak today. NPGA, we're the industry's national trade association, and we represent all segments of the U.S. propane industry. That includes propane marketers, wholesalers, suppliers, and equipment manufacturers. Now, 50 million American homes use propane, with more than 11 million households using it for either space or water heating. And those, of course, are the two most energy-intensive applications in a typical dwelling. Across the country, 9% of all households use propane for at least one residential application, whether that's space heating, water heating, clothes drying, cooking, or fireplaces. And these numbers are especially high across portions of PADS 1 and 2. The propane industry, we support 59,000 American jobs and contribute more than $65 billion in economic activity annually. But at the end of the day, most propane marketers are small, family-owned businesses that are working to meet the unique heating and energy needs of the communities in which they serve and are invested. So, quick reminder, propane is a clean, energy-rich molecule comprised of carbon and hydrogen atoms. It's been in the marketplace for more than a century, and the direct use of propane, which has a low CO2 coefficient, is an extremely efficient way to consume energy. Propane is a beneficial byproduct of conventional energy production, principally natural gas. That said, we have seen strong growth in recent years of renewable propane, which is chemically identical to the traditional molecule, but is derived from renewable feedstocks and has an even lower carbon footprint. Now, America is a leading global producer of propane, and domestic production has skyrocketed since the 2010s. In January 2024, so January of this year, field production of propane was more than 60 million barrels. By comparison, if we go back 15 years to January 2009, field production was only 16 million barrels. So over that time period, what did we do? Well, we increased production by more than 44 million more barrels per month. That's almost a factor of 4. It's truly an incredible story of American innovation and ingenuity. Propane production takes place in 29 states, with the top 5 being Texas, Oklahoma, West Virginia, Colorado, and North Dakota. Propane is used to power a host of end-use applications and is utilized across all sectors of our economy. However, residential and commercial gallons do represent the lion's share of all fuel sold. If you look at the visual on the screen, you'll see some common residential applications: cooking, clothes drying, pool heating, and outdoor entertainment. In 2022, odorized propane sales were 9.84 billion gallons, or 234 million barrels. That represented a 3.1% year-over-year increase from 2021. And the top 5 states for consumption are California, Michigan, Minnesota, Texas, and Wisconsin. So, on background, energy producers don't decide to drill a well because they can get propane out of it. Rather, they're going to drill a well to get access to oil or natural gas deposits. Focusing on natural gas for a moment. Natural gas that is wet contains large amounts of natural gas liquids, NGLs, including propane. Now, companies separate out NGLs to achieve, what is known as pipeline quality natural gas, and that's the stuff that flows through local distribution systems. But since we just isolated propane, a molecule that can economically be used to provide heat, power, and energy, what do we do with it? Well, of course, we put it to work. Typically, energy molecules are separated from each other through a process of heating and cooling. Different molecules change states at different temperatures and different pressures. Companies then sell products on site or transport them to another location. Pipelines, of course, play an important role here. Around the country, we have in the neighborhood of 130 refineries, 75 NGL fractionators, 8 major transmission pipelines moving propane, and hundreds of propane supply terminals, which are all served by different modes of transportation, including rail and truck. That said, NPGA, our membership is largely focused on downstream activities, wholesaling and marketing of finished products for consumption. But of course, the extraction, separation, the storage, and the movement of propane across the entire value chain does impact the industry. In the propane industry, we really think about fuel storage in 3 different parts: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary storage refers to the very large supply repositories such as underground caverns or above ground spherical storage facilities. Example of both are on the graphic on your screen. Secondary storage, that's going to consist of the thousands of industry-owned bulk plants. A typical bulk plant tank has a capacity of 18,000 to 30,000 gallons, and most plants have multiple tanks. Finally, tertiary storage. This is all of the fuel stored on site at the millions of customer locations around the country. For tanks in the field, common tank sizes range from 120 to 1,000 gallons. And with the use of remote tank monitors, marketers know how much fuel is out there in tertiary storage. Now, propane can safely and economically be transported multiple ways, and that is a good thing. There is resilience value in moving energy in different ways. Rail cars. The movement of propane via rail cars is critically important. NPGA engages with rail carriers, rail associations, the Federal Railroad Administration, and the Surface Transportation Board. Now, a typical rail car is going to hold about 33,000 gallons of propane. Transports. Propane transports crisscross the country. Transports will be dispatched to supply terminals to retrieve product and then bring it back to bulk plants. Some marketers, they have their own transports. Others will contract with transport companies. A propane transport is going to have a capacity anywhere from 8,000 to 18,000 gallons. This depends largely on the market and state restrictions. Bobtails. Bobtails deliver product from a bulk plant to a customer. This is the vehicle that we are most often associated with, as they are easily recognizable. Typical bobtail, it's going to carry between 3,000 and 5,000 gallons of fuel. Tanker ships. Propane is also moved on tanker ships over water. For example, there's a large holding terminal at the port of Providence, Rhode Island, that receives propane shipments from ocean-going vessels. And pipelines. Propane is well served by a national network of 8 transmission pipelines that move a variety of products, including LPG. Propane companies often contract for specific amounts of product over a given period of time. Now, as we talk about infrastructure and distribution, I will note that NPGA does have an internal supply and logistics committee, and it meets on a regular basis. The committee will also meet on an ad hoc basis when needed during major winter storms, hurricanes, or disruptions of major assets, things of that nature. And we hear from entities across the industry value chain. So, code standards and oversight. Now, the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA, codes 58 and 54 are really the benchmarks for the handling and transportation of propane, as well as the installation of propane equipment and appliances, and that's both inside and outside of a structure. However, different states, of course, are operating on different versions of these NFPA codes. I live in Minnesota, and we use the 2018 versions. Now, just like other businesses, we are subject to regulatory oversight by various federal and state entities. Example of federal oversight: FERC and PHMSA oversee portions of pipeline infrastructure that we utilize. US DOT has regulatory responsibility over portable propane cylinders. US DOE regulates the energy consumption of various end-use gas products. And US DOL oversees worker and workplace safety. Now, in regards to the regulatory responsibility for things like propane bulk plants, different states, well, they're going to use different agencies, but common ones include the state fire marshal, the Department of Agriculture, an LP gas commission, or a local entity that has jurisdiction and has been empowered with oversight duties. Emergency response, really important issue. During an emergency or a natural disaster, I really think of propane as a fuel of first resort. Propane is truly portable, on-demand energy that can be relied upon when you need it most. Propane can quite literally be brought into an affected area to provide relief. The propane industry itself, well, we are very decentralized, quite difficult for a single event to bring the entire industry to its knees and prevent product from moving. Notably, unlike other energy sources, propane does not solely rely upon permanent physical connections to move energy. Grid electrons and utility natural gas need working electric lines and gas pipelines to transport the electricity and the natural gas to end users. But during a hurricane, an earthquake, or a malicious attack, that permanent infrastructure cannot always be utilized. Now, in contrast, propane storage and delivery infrastructure is nimble, scalable, and easily deployable. You can set a tank or a cylinder and connect it to your end-use application, a space heater, water heater, cooktop, or power generation equipment. Now, over the last few years, we've seen a huge spike in demand for propane-powered generators by both residential and commercial customers. Unlike other generator fuels, propane does not degrade or expire. It doesn't oxidize. It has an indefinite shelf life in its storage vessel. It is there when you need it. Propane cylinder trucks and bobtails can bring fuel to exactly where it's needed, as these are over-the-road vehicles. And this is why you often see them in the aftermath of disasters or emergency situations, because few energy sources as versatile as propane can be deployed in such a fashion at such speed. But sometimes when disaster strikes, all you want is a hot meal, right? Propane has long been utilized by the World Central Kitchen and Operation Barbecue Relief to bring hot meals to first responders and people impacted by disasters. Finally, we have states from coast to coast that are experiencing more frequent power outages, and the duration of these outages is getting longer. I mention this, again, because there is great value in energy diversity, both molecules and electrons working together to meet the unique energy needs of Americans. And regarding resilience, propane-powered microgrids, combined heat and power systems, dual-fuel emergency response vehicles, and propane air systems can all help increase the strength, reliability, and resilience of our energy sector. State energy offices, you guys do a lot of important work, and of course, there are plenty of areas we can continue to work together. Some examples: state emergency planning and energy security preparations. If there is a black sky event, your offices want to ensure plans and processes are in place to serve the public. And there are opportunities to work together with industry on these scenarios. Most states have comprehensive statewide energy plans, and they're periodically updated. The propane industry, well, we have a presence in every county and every state in the country. We provide critical energy to power important end-use applications, and energy planners should be mindful of the role that we play. Now, many states are taking inventory of their GHG emissions and are devising strategies and plans to reduce emissions. We certainly want to work collaboratively on these decarbonization proposals and other initiatives, to help safeguard the environment. State energy offices care deeply about the energy workforce. I know this is a big issue for NASEO. The propane industry strongly supports state efforts to address the growing skills gap and ensure a pipeline of career-ready workers. And of course, the federal government has passed substantial energy-related legislation in the past few years, including the IIJA and the IRA. There are many opportunities for propane to help states meet the underlying tenets of these new programs, I would say in an immediate and cost-effective fashion. We are a resource. Please treat us as such. As a reminder, our industry has 36 state and regional associations that represent the industry across all 50 states. The contact information for each state association executive is available on NPGA's website under the My State section. And state executives, they have really good intimate relationships with retailers operating in the field. They too are a resource. That's all for me, but thanks again to NASEO and to Sarah for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate that. And that map with the propane pipelines was really provided some perspective, I think, on which regions are really connected to that pipeline, especially you noted in the Midwest, with a great Midwestern accent, I'd say. With that, I will pass it over to Chip, Aaron, and Neil from Colonial Pipeline.
Sarah, I'll let Aaron and Neil go ahead and kick things off for us.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. Yeah. All right, guys. Again, thank you for having us. It's a privilege to work with our governmental partners. We like to be a trusted partner, and we like to have great trusted partners. So it's an honor and a privilege to be here. Thanks to NASEO for having us, and thanks to Chip for helping set this up. So as mentioned, working alongside Chip, who is a manager on our government affairs team, myself and Aaron Smith, who are on the business development team here at Colonial, do different things. But the way that we're going to handle this, I'm going to kind of give an overview of the company itself, as well as Colonial Pipeline, and then I'm going to pass it over to Aaron. He's going to kind of describe how products get to you and how product flows on pipelines as big as ours, as well as some incident response and safety and monitoring. And then he'll pass it over to me, and I'll kind of talk how we speak and engage with all of our customers, as well as some things coming down the pipeline, pun intended, related to energy transition and emerging fuels. So we'll cruise through. So Colonial Pipeline is the largest refined products pipeline in the United States. I think we move about 2.5 million barrels of fuel a day. Alpharetta, Georgia is where Aaron and I are located. That's where our headquarters is, just north of Atlanta, Georgia. Nearly 1,100 employees. I think we're up to 1,137 now is what I heard the other day. Not to be specific, but we've got close to about 500 here in the Alpharetta office. Everybody else is distributed anywhere from Houston, where all the origin points on our pipeline are, all the way up to our termination point in Linden, New Jersey. We'll keep on going. Yeah, so just kind of an overview. The reason we like to show this is that Colonial got a new CEO this past year. So Melanie Little came over from Magellan, now One Oak. So she joined in 2023, and this is her leadership team underneath her. And here's where the good stuff starts. Colonial Pipeline, 5,500 miles of pipe that originates in Houston and goes all the way up to Linden, New Jersey, and serves the New York Harbor. The reason that Colonial is where it is today was back in the early 60s. You can see 1963 is when fuel started flowing on the pipeline. A bunch of majors came together and came together on a way to connect Pad 3 production to Pad 1 demand. So Pad 1 being the East Coast, Pad 3 being the middle of the U.S., especially down in the Gulf Coast where Texas and Louisiana are, which is where you see a lot of the refineries. Transit time from Houston to Linden is just around 20 days. So you can see on this map, you see a lot of our main lines and then our stub lines, which are in blue. Any breakout tankage, our airport delivery facilities. We service 8 airports directly and 14 indirectly, totaling 22, as well as injection stations and delivery facilities. Power stats. Do you want to go into power stats for me? Sure. Yeah. So one of the questions that Sarah and others had asked, just for curiosity, we have about 80 pump stations along our system, which are where we are sucking a lot of electricity to move the product down our pipeline from Houston all the way up to the New York Harbor area. We consume about 2.7 million megawatts a year and are connected through 25 different electric utility partners. So the power side, the electric utility side of our business is a very vital piece of our business, and definitely a focus, and we have a great working relationship with a number of those parties along our system.
Thank you, Aaron.
As far as access to supply goes, I kind of mentioned it with Pad 1 refining, but we service 28 refineries on our pipeline. Most of those are down in the Gulf Coast area, so your Texas and Louisiana. And then we've got a couple up in Woodbury and kind of the Pennsylvania, New Jersey area as well, which you can see up there. 8.4 million barrels of production. Colonial by the numbers. We like to show this slide because it really speaks to the size and scale of Colonial Pipeline. We transport refined products for more than 50 million Americans. That's 100 million gallons per day. The daily volume could fill the gas tanks of 7 million cars and 11,000 tanker trucks. Again, you see we service 28 refineries in the United States. We service 8 airports directly and 14 indirectly. And we also service over 45 military installations up the U.S. East Coast. I'm going to pass it over to Aaron to talk about how product gets to you.
Great. Thank you, Neil. So this is a relatively new graphic that we've decided to put together. And as you can see here, it kind of looks at the entire supply chain, if you will, from bringing crude fuel out of the ground and going through the refining process, then going into the midstream, and ultimately all the way to the gas stations that you and I go to every day to fill our gas tanks. What you can see there is the Colonial Pipeline system is kind of in that middle dark blue there where you see our role. So we are receiving product, gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel or kerosene from various refineries and their tankage, whether it's on refinery or off refinery, but that product is fed into our system, and we also have tankage along our system for breakout to be able to supply different markets, and we have 14 different tank farms along our system. But within that 5,500 miles of pipeline, you see there, we are supplying a lot of folks, and then we feed into various terminals, and we also are in the terminaling business. As you can see there, the local terminal to the right side of your screen, that's something we've just broken into in the last couple of years, is actually being on the downstream supply. But as you can see there, we do feed military installations and various airports, as Neil has already indicated. But the last mile, the true last mile of product and how it gets to the gas station is really handled by the tanker trucks that you and I see on the road every day. Colonial is a long haul transmission system. For those in the power side, I think you kind of get that. We are not necessarily the end distributor, but rather the long haul transporter. And that's what we are best at. We are akin to a FedEx or a UPS in the sense that we don't own any of the product that moves in our system, but rather move it for a fee, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. So as we move through, and we do get this question quite a bit, as product is moving in our pipeline, how do you keep it all separate? Well, the fact is we actually do not put a physical barrier typically between products that move in our system. We do have certain pipelines that transport only gasoline, while others only transport distillate fuels, kerosene and diesel as examples. But due to the nature of the hydraulics, the actual physics of the pipeline and how product can move in our system, turbulent flow allows us to put products together in a system, gas and diesel and jet fuel, minimizing that amount of product that commingles between those two different products, what we call transmix, and maximizing the actual usable fuel that comes out the other end of the pipeline. So it's pretty cool. I'm not an engineer, but when it's been explained to me, I find that rather fascinating. So just to be clear, we do not put any physical barriers between products that move in our system. We are able to move those barrels in the same system at the same time. So who are some of the folks that regulate us? Obviously, as a pipeline, critical to our nation's infrastructure, energy infrastructure, we are heavily regulated. And so, FERC, as I mentioned earlier, our rate structure is governed by FERC. We are able to charge fees, we call tariffs, based on moving a barrel from Houston to New York or any point in between, and we charge tariffs for those movements. Those movements and those rates are set by our regulator, FERC, on an annual basis. But we have a lot of other regulators too that look into our business and making sure that we're doing what we need to be doing. For instance, PHMSA, under the Department of Transportation, governs our pipeline integrity and tank integrity programs. We have a very robust integrity program to make sure that our assets, while they've been in place since the early 60s, they will continue to remain in good working order for many, many more decades to come. And PHMSA oversees that process and the regulations that we comply with. On the state level and local level, we also have air permits that we need to get for our various tank farm facilities. As Neil showed on one of the earlier graphics, we have breakout tankage in the Gulf Coast where we're actually aggregating products to then put onto the pipeline. We also have a number of tank farms on what we call the downstream side or the delivery end of our pipeline, where we are breaking out from the pipeline and putting it into tanks to then deliver to those terminals. Those tank farms, those facilities that we operate, require air permits. And those air permits both are EPA and state regulated. So we have a very close working relationship with all of the states that we transport product through. One of the other questions in prepping for this discussion was, well, Colonial, what do you do when something bad happens, when something unfortunate, whether it's a hurricane or a tornado comes and interrupts actual operation, or in the case of a cyber attack, like many of you know that we had a few years ago? Well, we employ an incident command system. And for those that have been in the government sector, this is probably not that unfamiliar to you. It's the National Incident Management System, NIMS, and we use the ICS program. And so some of you who have participated in incidents in your other roles may recognize this planning P and the cycle that we go through on any kind of incident when something happens, i.e. When we had our cyber attack, or even when we have an unfortunate loss of containment and product goes outside of our pipeline or our tank systems. We immediately engage our incident command system and the folks that are involved with that. There are a number of folks up and down the chain within Colonial that get involved anytime we have to open up this ICS. But it is something that we do routinely practice and exercise in the event that the bell goes off and we have to respond. So as you can see here, there are a number of things that we do as an organization to keep our sharpness, to keep our readiness for the unfortunate events when they happen. A couple of things I want to call out to you. For starters, we do about 50 different exercises along our pipeline system every year. That's a lot of folks that are involved. That's a lot of time and effort to coordinate all of that. And those are incidents, basically everything from just a very local, hyper-local event that might be within a facility. We may practice that, all the way up to doing a full-scale drill that requires people from all up and down our pipeline to respond to an emergency event, a training exercise, if you will, and literally go to that place. So whether that's, we've done drills in the past in the Philadelphia market, we've done them in the Southeast, we've done them in the Gulf Coast. And what happens is when that training bell goes off, people will actually mobilize and do those exercises. And we will engage our local third-party responders, local responders, as well as different government agencies in those exercises, so that it's not just Colonial doing it, but we are using the people that during a real life event would respond. And so we're building that muscle memory, if you will. A couple other things that I think are very interesting there. You can see we also participate in events that we don't necessarily schedule, but that are set up by the government. As you can see there, some government exercises that we are participating in this year, roughly 5 of those, as well as local agencies that we get invited to participate. So we're happy to do that. We actually have a dedicated team that focuses on crisis management or incident response. And then we have others within the organization, such as Neil or myself, who flex up when the event happens, and we are pulled in as needed. A couple other things I want to point out about our operation. Obviously, when you're operating 5,500 miles of pipe, safety is paramount. It is one of our core values at Colonial. It has been my entire career. We do not compromise safety, and we want everybody to come to work and go home in the same condition. So safety is absolutely paramount in what we do. We all have personal accountability for our safety goals. And in fact, we all have stop work authority. So if at any time I feel, or Neil, or any one of our employees feels like something is unsafe, or we're just unsure, we have the ability to stop that. Even when we're out in the field, we can ask people to stand down and they will do that. And that goes for our contractors as well. As Jake mentioned earlier, pipeline flow, it is constant. It is just on the propane side, same thing on the refined or clean product side, as we like to say. Our pipeline operates 24/7, 365 days. It is remotely operated, with our control center being here in Atlanta. And then we have remote operating facilities at each of our tank farms that are also controlling the flow once it's in a tank farm and then onto what we call some of our stub lines. As you can see here, protecting the environment and protecting all those that we live in and amongst is very, very important to us. And so we are constantly monitoring our pipeline. We are monitoring the right-of-way, ensuring that people aren't building stuff on our right-of-way, that the vegetation around our right-of-way is staying at bay so that we can continue to monitor it in accordance with PHMSA regulation. We actually fly our pipeline routinely each week, as you can see there. And lastly, I'll say this, we do encourage folks to call if you're ever digging. 811 is a very important thing. Call before you dig, whether that's you're digging in your home, around your house, or if you're over at somebody else's house, or just anywhere. We would encourage you to call and have the pipelines in the area, whether they're the natural gas or propane lines that may be feeding your home, or they're the refined products pipelines that are feeding the area. You just never know what may lie beneath. So we encourage everybody to call 811 before you dig, to ensure before you put a shovel in the ground that you are going to be doing it safely and you know where all obstructions below grade are located. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to my colleague, Neil.
Yep. So thanks, Aaron. So last bit we wanted to catch on was a little bit of who we deal with, who our shippers are. Colonial's got around 250 active shippers on the pipeline that move product every single day. Those products include gasoline grades, diesel, jet fuel, transmix, and then you've got some other products in which I'll talk about here in a minute. But of those shippers, major and independent oil companies, so a lot of the big oil companies that you know, also a bunch of wholesale marketing companies that are out there trading the pipeline, as well as retail distributors, all the major and non-major airlines in the US, and then trading companies. On top of that, you've got governmental agencies like the Defense Logistics Agency, how I had mentioned earlier that we supply military installations up the US. That's who that's for. They buy a lot of jet fuel. So moving on, one of the biggest, the last topic that they had asked us to cover was what's next? So since the early 60s, Colonial Pipeline has moved your regular products, like I just mentioned, your gasolines, your diesels, your jet fuels. But what's next? As many of you may or may not know, there are two new products that are coming down the pipeline, one of those being renewable diesel and another one being sustainable aviation fuel. Renewable diesel has been around for 15 to 20 years. It first flowed on our pipeline back in 2014. That was prior to California's low carbon fuel standard going into place, which pointed all the economics out west. So now you do not see any of those products moving on Colonial Pipeline. That said, there's going to be a time and place when that comes. We are currently connected to the largest renewable diesel pipe producer in the United States, that being Diamond Green Diesel. They've been around for a while. They were kind of the first major to come into play, and they're still producing this stuff on a daily basis, and a lot of it. They're pointing it all out west. They are jumping into the sustainable aviation fuel game soon. What are the differences between the two of those? Renewable diesel is made from your fats, oils, and greases. So soybean oil, canola oil, used cooking oil. A lot of that stuff is used to make renewable diesel. Renewable diesel is a drop-in fuel for conventional diesel. Sustainable aviation fuel can also be made with the same thing. It just has to be hydrotreated. But there are also different annexes that are coming down the pipeline that we are looking into ways to make it in different ways. For instance, your alcohol to jets, your ethanol to jets, wood waste to fuel, things like that. So pretty exciting, interesting times in the United States right now. Again, a lot of this stuff is pointed out west. Just a little bit of why are we here. I like to point it out in two different ways: government influence, producer influence, and airline influence when it comes to renewable fuels in the United States. So what is coming? East Coast state level low carbon fuel standards, just like California and Oregon and Washington State. You're going to see New York State's been trying to get one down the aisle for 4 years now. It hasn't gotten there yet, but we're hoping it gets there soon. Same with New Jersey and Maryland. Let's see, you've got the U.S. Treasury's upgraded GREET model, which talks about greenhouse gas emissions and how carbon intensity is calculated. That's going to be coming out soon. The Federal Aviation Administration put through an initiative in last year's Inflation Reduction Act out of the Biden administration that put $244.5 million into a grant awards for infrastructure build-outs for the adoption of sustainable aviation fuel in the United States. Those awards are going to be coming out within the next few months. And then also just other federal level incentives and updated regulations for moving this stuff. These products, while they want to be adopted in the United States, they're generically a lot more expensive than your conventional fuels. So there are incentives in place and regulations in place that bring that gap between those two fuels together to be able to adopt them. That's why everything points everything out to California right now, because California's got state level incentives that you can tack on to federal incentives to make it economical for that stuff to be consumed. As far as airline influence goes, airlines have announced targets of at least 10% sustainable aviation fuel adoption by 2030. Again, that SAF demand can increase rapidly, but it needs a biofuel credit to cover the difference of cost with conventional jet fuel. So that's something that we're working through. We think that the IRA will be a game changer for the SAF use, as well as state level incentives. Europe has a policy that actually regulates this stuff. The United States does not currently. So we'll see that. And then also just your producer influence. Again, we're connected to two of the majors right now. There's a lot more people, companies out there that like to produce this stuff. What we're doing is every single day we've got a strategy to work with them. What do our shippers want to move? How can we move it in a safe and reliable and efficient way for them if it makes sense for Colonial Pipeline and it's safe to do so? So those are all the exciting things on the renewable side that we're currently working through. Obviously, it's a very changing market every single day. It's an exciting market, but something that we're staying pretty head on with. So.
Yeah, so I'll say just in closing, Colonial, we've been around for 60 plus years, and we think that we're going to be around for at least another 60 plus years. We all hear about ultimate demand destruction relative to conventional fuels. But as Neil just kind of showed you, we are going to be a player in renewable fuel transport as well. We want to be there for our customers, and our customers are helping to shape the products that we move on our pipeline every day. While we do believe that conventional fuels made through petroleum gas, diesel and jet fuel will be around for a number of years, decades even. We are trying to position ourselves to be able to meet those needs for the folks that want to take renewable fuels to the demand centers along the East Coast. So again, thank you for the time today. Hopefully this has been somewhat educational, and Sarah, we'll hand it back to you for any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron and Neil and Chip. That was awesome. I know a lot of folks are interested in that sustainable fuel space. That was an interesting tidbit there. Beyond that, I think it's really important that you guys showed that conversation on how production is flowing. I think there's some misconceptions as far as how fast fuel does go through those pipes. So that kind of squishes those. So that was helpful. Before we go into some questions, I have some already. I did want to plug one resource from DOE Caesar. It's a great one-on-one resource, kind of in addition to some of the remarks that were provided today. It's part of their learning series, which Jasmine will drop in the chat, but it's a how it works propane supply chain. So it touches on some of the things that Jake mentioned, as well as a how it works refined petroleum products. So would encourage folks to check those out. Those are really a quick read, not too long, and super helpful. So as we go into some questions, I had one come in here, potentially for both of you guys. Oh no, this one's for Colonial. So I had a question come in that says, You guys carry several refined products, including gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and home heating. As pipeline operators, how are the scheduling of products determined? Any industry or federal encouragement?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for that, Sarah. And we have a scheduling group that looks at the different types of products and that work very closely with our product quality assurance team that are looking at the various specifications for each product. So we have a pretty robust product handling and product movement program manual, if you will, that we employ that helps us determine how we need to schedule products. We move products. Generally speaking, we use the term cycle. So every 5 days, we pick up the same product from the origin centers, the refineries, if you will. So we pick up a particular, let's say, regular gasoline grade today, and 5 days from now, we'll pick up that same regular gasoline grade. And we do that 72 times a year, 5 days in between each cycle. But we are using that product handling manual that I mentioned earlier to determine how we sequence the product within the pipeline to ensure that we maintain quality for the product from the time that we get it all the way through and until we deliver it into the various terminals. So I hope that answers the question for you a little bit.
And just in addition to that, obviously there's some market tightening and, certain regions might need petroleum or whatever product it might be. Is there any consideration with sequencing in that regard?
So from a sequencing perspective, again, we operate on a 5-day cycle. We do have buffer tankage at our tank farms. So if you can imagine, we're moving 2.5 million barrels a day, 100 million gallons plus a day. Our system tankage at the 14 tank farms along the system are not necessarily built only to transport 2.5 million a day. We actually have breakout tankage that can accommodate a little bit more. Generally 3 to 4 days of extra product are sitting in our tanks. What is on the downstream side of us within the terminals is also anywhere from another 3 to maybe 8 days of tankage or of product capacity, if you will, sitting in the various terminals. So there is always a bit of buffer, if you will, in the bulk transport system. So if, God forbid, something were to happen today and our pipeline was unable to deliver product, there is a buffer there's a buffer initially at the terminal side, not to mention what's already within the gas station as well, by the way, or the airport or whatever the facility is. But then there's that buffer at the terminal until we can get our pipeline operational. And when we do have a pipeline event that causes a pipeline to be inoperable, that doesn't mean the entire system is down. We are able to isolate different systems or different pipelines, if you will, throughout our system and may be able to continue to transport product to other markets. It really just depends where the incident may be.
Thank you for that. We have Ben Bolton who has a question, so I will unmute him. And go ahead, Ben.
All right, thanks. And thanks everyone for this wonderful webinar today. It's always great to hear directly from the source on how y'all do things. And I appreciate the nod to ICS, and I've been able to participate in some of y'all's exercises. It's great just comfort for folks to know that we're all speaking the same language there. My question was, one thing, and I may have missed it, is can you touch on where and the number of terminals y'all actually own now?
So Colonial as an organization, we own 4 different terminals along our pipeline system. We have one here in Atlanta, adjacent to our Atlanta tank farm. We also have one in Charlotte, one in Chattanooga, and one in Fredericksburg, Virginia. I will note the one in Fredericksburg, Virginia is not actually connected to the Colonial system. It's connected to the Products Pipeline Southeast, which also runs adjacent to most of our pipeline footprint, owned by Kinder Morgan.
Thank you.
And roughly, sorry, I think the other part of your question was, we're connected to roughly 270 terminals on the downstream side of our system, on the delivery side.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for the question, Ben. I had 2 more come in. I believe this is for Colonial. Is there any backup power generation to the pump stations along the pipeline?
A great question. And to a certain extent, yes, we do have generators that are standby on the ready across our system. If you can imagine it, the size of tractor trailers that we're able to move along our system as needed. But quite frankly, the generation piece of it or the power piece of it, a lot of times is, going to be dependent clearly on the electric utility in that area. So, we are sourcing barrels from the grid. We don't do cogen on our system. But yes, we do have some backup along our system, and we look at that from time to time from a risk and mitigation standpoint.
Yeah, certainly that redundancy is really important, and I know our folks are super plugged into that. Had another question come in. Can you speak to any plans to transport hydrogen via the existing US pipeline network?
Well, I could talk to it from our pipeline perspective, and hydrogen is not a fuel that we can transport within our current system. It needs different specifications for the type of pipeline because it's just a different type of fuel. We're not able to put it and commingle it, if you will, with refined products. Pipelines that move hydrogen move at different pressures, and the actual makeup of the pipeline itself, the structure of it is just different than what we operate for refined products. But yes, there are hydrogen pipelines out there that do move it in the Texas and Louisiana area. And I don't know, Jake, I know hydrogen isn't directly your area, but you might have some insights to that as well.
I mean, as far as we're concerned, not really. I know there are probably some FERC regulated pipelines that are moving hydrogen, but it's just not really something we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Although obviously we're an energy molecule and we are comprised of some, hydrogen atoms.
Great, thanks. Had another question come in for the both of you. Who is the best point of contact for state energy offices during market tightening or disruption? I know, Jake, you mentioned the state association's point of contact. That seems like a good connection, as well as I know you mentioned during your remarks I didn't know if I caught it right, transportation or logistics committee meeting. That seems like it's maybe just for your members, but are those open to state energy officials, or are those on an ad hoc basis?
Yeah, we have an ongoing supply and logistics committee, and they meet on a regular basis. They meet on an ad hoc basis if there's an event, and we do welcome speakers and panelists from organizations and associations like NASEO. Generally speaking, it's mostly going to be a closed meeting unless we invite you to them. But there's a lot of overlap. I think there's a lot of content, especially from a resilience and reliability standpoint, that would be of great interest to NASEO. So happy to follow up after the webinar regarding that.
All right.
And I'll defer to my colleague Chip as far as the main contact within Colonial. At a high level, though, Colonial, during an incident, will comment about our practices, our pipeline, our assets. We're unable to comment, generally speaking, about the market. That you'd have to go to the people who actually own the fuel or the terminals themselves to comment on.
Yeah, and Aaron, I would just say to add to that too, that's a great point. I think, one point that we try to stress, during, when we do have supply issues, that once we deliver that product under the fence line, we don't know what's left at that terminal. That's up to that terminal operator to provide that information. But as far as a direct contact, I would say I would probably fall into be that person and can direct questions to the right person within Colonial and circle back with whoever has those questions externally. Great,
thanks. I know many of folks know Chip already, so we'll be sure to pass along all their contact information after the webinar. But Chip, I did have a question specifically for you and kind of a plug for an upcoming event. I know we have a tour scheduled with state members in the Southeast Regional meeting coming up. Any sneak peeks, any comments, what folks can expect on that tour?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're going to do, or actually two things, and Sarah, thank you for plugging that. I appreciate that. We're going to have a group actually a week from today, a group from your Southeast meeting that's going to be taking place in Atlanta, that will come out to our corporate headquarters in Alpharetta. We will give them a tour of the control room there. They'll kind of get to see how things work and really almost be able to look over the shoulder of one of the folks who's working in the control room. And then also, a couple will have the experience of actually working on one of the simulators that we have for some of our folks train on. So it'll give you really kind of a firsthand, hands-on type of approach to kind of what happens in the control room. The other thing that we'll be doing is the gentleman who is our director of emergency response will be giving a briefing, kind of similar to what we've talked about today, especially as we're kind of looking into going into the storm season for 2024. Give people a sense of what Colonial does, in the event of storms and how we respond to that both locally and throughout our system as well. So that's kind of a little bit of a highlight as to what can be expected next Monday.
Yeah, that's exciting. I'm still trying to weasel my way into that, getting on that trip. So we'll see if it works. But I know a lot of folks are excited about that. And especially that emergency operations briefing, that sounds wonderful. On the topic of hazards in that storm, what hazards are y'all typically looking at? I know the pipeline infrastructure is running along that East Coast corridor. Is it the hurricanes? Is it the storms, flooding? What things are y'all concerned about?
So I'll say at a high level, I mean, we monitor weather, any kind of major weather event that's going to come in and potentially damage the electric grid, which is clearly supplying power to our pump stations and to our tank farms. We obviously have a lot of pipeline, but most of it is buried 3, 4, sometimes a lot further feet below grade. So those are generally unimpacted by any kind of weather event. It's more about the above ground facilities. And so we do things like making sure we can keep enough product in the tank so that the actual tank shell itself wouldn't float away, say, during a flood type of event. Our facilities also have stormwater plans and flood pumps so that we can whisk water away, if you will, away from the tank farm or the tank assets and our pipeline assets and get it to the various stormwater management systems that surround our facilities. So, those are the kind of things that we're looking at. We're also trying to make sure that our employees are safe, that their families are safe, and that they can get to and from work. So sometimes we will ask our employees to hunker down within our facilities if it gets to that point, or we will find a shelter for them close by our facilities so that we can make sure that our facilities are able to remain open and usable during an event.
All right. Thank you for that. I know we're coming up on the hour, 3 minutes till. I wanted to throw it over to Colonial and also Jake. Any last comments, takeaways you want to leave state energy officials and others on the line? I know we have some emergency managers online. I'll throw it over to you guys.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll just say from NPGA's perspective, and I touched on this a little bit during my presentation, but state energy offices right now, you guys have your hands full. There's been a lot of statutes at the federal level that have been enacted in the last couple of years, a lot of rulemakings going on, and they impact the energy sector as a whole. Please continue to look towards NPGA and myself as a resource, because these policies, these programs, they do impact us and our customers, and we certainly want to be a part of the process with you guys and, answer questions when we can.
From the Colonial perspective, I'll just say thanks again, Sarah, and the folks at NASEO for allowing us to come today and share a little bit about Colonial, our operations, and how we interact, certainly with our customers, as well as you, various state agencies that we interact with, and when the unfortunate bell goes off to deal with an incident. But that shouldn't be the only time we're talking. We obviously like to hear from you guys and invite you to come out when you're in the area in Atlanta, and happy to talk through our operations so you can see it and get comfortable with it. But as far as the daily interactions, I may just turn this over to Chip and see if he wants to say a word or two, because he's probably going to be your primary contact going forward.
No, and Aaron, I think you nailed it. I think it's really, it's great that we're part of this organization. There's a lot of folks that we work with, when things are getting kind of rough with regards to our system. But I think to your point about talking on a daily basis, getting people the opportunity to come out and see how it really works and kind of do kind of a hands-on tour. I think will give people a lot of different perspective as to how we operate on a daily basis. So good point.
Thank you to both of you all. Neil, Aaron, Jake, Chip, I really appreciate your participation today. I think underscore some of your thoughts. You guys are some critical partners. It's great to form those relationships before, goodness forbid, something happens. So we'll share those contact information. Great situational awareness information shared today. And yeah, just appreciate everyone's time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
Thanks all.